Hi, so I wanted to talk to you about being CNBC or childless not by choice during times of coronavirus. So being childless not by choice, brings its own issues. Um, but there's obviously amplified or additional issues during this time. So the first thing I want to say really is that, this is a time where it's difficult for everybody, everyone, it's all relative. We all have our own issues in life, and we really do, and especially at this time, it's a difficult time for everyone. So those who have children who are perhaps, homeschooling, those who maybe have mental health issues, those who are childless not by choice, those who are child free. And by the way, I've done a video about the difference between childless and child free. It could be, for anyone who has never really suffered from mental health issues but is now finding themselves having mental health issues. It's difficult for single people, it's difficult for people who are in couples, it's difficult for people who are in happy relationships, and obviously for those who are already in unhappy or, toxic relationships, which is, really not an ideal situation. At the best of times, especially now, it can be stressful for those who are young, for those who are old, for those who, for everybody, basically. The reason I've decided to speak about those who are childless or CNBC is because sometimes, that's a subject which can often be a secret. People don't really speak up about being CNBC, or it can be a bit of a taboo subject as well. So I'm not speaking for every single person who is childless not by choice, by the way, obviously, because everyone has their own different story, and what I'm saying is not going to relate to everybody who's childless not by choice. There's going to be some people who don't feel that way, but I'm just speaking actually from my own experiences in life, from clients, from research, from studies that I've done over the many years. So I'm just speaking on a kind of general level, but yeah, this is not obviously going to apply to every single person. So as I mentioned before, I've also done a video about the difference between being childless and being child free. So just in a nutshell, for anyone that hasn't seen that, being childless is someone who very much wants to be a parent right now, who wants to be a parent, or who wanted to be a parent but was not able to for whatever reason. And there's so many different reasons. But that's another discussion, that's another video. But yeah, so basically that's someone that wants to be a parent but that isn't. So also to bear in mind really that during these times of coronavirus, that many couples or many single people even will have had their dreams of having IVF this year taken away from them. And that's something, I've seen it in the news, but it's not something really that's discussed so much. So IVF has obviously been cancelled, and for some people they may be able to pursue that in the future, and for others it may have been one of their last chances or their last chance. And even for those not having IVF, this coronavirus thing, if you've always wanted to have a family and thought, this year I'm going to try to have a child, that might have robbed your dreams as well, So there's going to be a whole load of reasons, and as I've mentioned before, everyone who is CNBC is not necessarily going to feel like this. I'm specifically talking about people who are childless not by choice and who are struggling with that and who are experiencing grief. So it is grief. There is a certain type of grief. It's called disenfranchised grief that comes with childlessness, and it's a very real grief, and it can be very amplified at the moment. But I'm really just doing this video to raise awareness, and if you are CNBC, just to let you know that you're not alone, and perhaps if you know someone that's CNBC, perhaps to give you an insight of how it potentially can be, because someone that is CNBC may well feel invisible or misunderstood, may well be keeping a secret, and now at this time it's going to be much more than ever, the potential of feeling more invisible, and more invalidated really can be much more than ever. So in some ways, I suppose, there's some kind of similarity or familiarity, I should say, with the issues that are brought up with coronavirus to those being childless not by choice. For example, you know, there is this certain, I've just mentioned it before, this disenfranchised grief, which is like, you know, having a kind of grief for a future that you may never have, you know, this worrying about I'm not going to be able to do this or that, this is going to profoundly change my future, and that kind of grief that, you know, many of us are feeling at the moment, you know, that's definitely something that, you know, if you're childless not by choice, it's definitely something that's quite familiar to you already, that, you know, mourning this loss, this idea, this dream of this family, of this child that you're never going to have, basically. So that's definitely something that's familiar. The other thing is basically, I suppose, feeling isolated, you know, feeling alone, feeling that loss of, you know, that kind of, that lack of that sense of belonging, of, you know, being with your family. You know, that's obviously something that's very much felt now in this coronavirus crisis. That's definitely something that being childless brings anyway, you know, that you do kind of sometimes feel like, well, where's my family? You know, you feel that kind of, that huge sense of loss, perhaps, and that sense of that big gap, that big void of, you know, basically. The other thing is as well, yeah, as I said, feeling isolated, feeling lonely, feeling perhaps, you know, maybe contemplating the whole maybe sense of purpose or meaning of life. You know, this coronavirus crisis has made us kind of question, what is the meaning of life and how has this happened? And, you know, why is this? Is there a reason behind it? All of these questions, you know, this is definitely something I think that if your child is not by choice and you're struggling with that, there's definitely things that already run through your mind, you know, quite often really. The other one, which is obviously, you know, really difficult, but this is definitely something as well that's on the mind of CNBC people that are struggling with this, is that feeling of fearing, you know, being at the end of your life and being alone, not having a family or your family there. This is definitely something that, you know, crops up in that kind of CNBC scenario, and that's definitely something I think that's cropping up in many people's minds at the moment, you know, with this coronavirus thing, and also that kind of certain feeling of things out of control, this is not what I planned for my future, and all of that kind of stuff. So there's definitely, you know, things that have familiar issues, I would say, which are obviously quite familiar to being childless not by choice, that are coming up in coronavirus at the moment, you know, and you know, you have to decide for yourself if it's a good thing that you're familiar with this already or if it's a bad thing. The other thing I suppose to bear in mind being CNBC during this time, and especially if you're single as well, is, you know, being at home, feeling isolated, having all this time to, you know, having all these thoughts and these kind of feelings going around, and all these special occasions that are happening, you know, during this time, you know, everything from Mother's Day, which is obviously can be a very painful time anyway for those who are CNBC, especially if you don't have, you know, your mother there as well as not being a mother. But, you know, we've had Mother's Day during lockdown, so especially if you're single, as I said, you know, being on your own, and Mother's Day, April Fool's Day can, you know, that can be a trigger, that can feel like, oh, if I was with my family or my kids, I'd be doing this. Easter time, you know, there's, I mean, it goes without saying really, you know, Easter egg hunts or Easter eggs, or, you know, all of those special occasions which are difficult at the best of times when we're not in a lockdown, now are going to be amplified perhaps, and very difficult to be dealing with. Yes, lots of special occasions. That's not even to mention birthdays, or just like dinner times, or Sunday dinner or Sunday lunch, and, you know, all of these times which we kind of, you know, as being childless not by choice, you kind of deal with on a regular basis, but of course now they're going to be even more poignant, really. And I suppose the other thing is, I suppose when you're at home, and especially if you're on your own during these times, you know, you're turning to comfort. So what do we do to try and be comforted? We try and connect. So for example, going on social media, and you might see, and I'm not saying it's wrong or right or anything, I'm just saying how it is. But there's going to be lots of people doing like family things or family challenges during lockdown stuff, and especially if you're on your own, that's going to be quite triggering for you, you know. There's also a lot of memes going around on social media, like life in isolation with kids, life in isolation without kids, and kind of portraying, you know, the childless and child-free, you know, being at home, drinking their margaritas every day at 5 p.m, whatever, and, you know, just enjoying it really. And I'm not saying that the people aren't as well, but you know, that might be very untrue for many people, because they might have their own mental health issues. They might be in the midst of like being overwhelmed by grief, of being in their house, being reminded that it's an empty home without family, and just trying to get through the day of not feeling that crushing loneliness and grief really, you know. The other thing that we turn to, for example, daytime TV, and daytime TV can be centered around families, you know, family recipes for Easter, what to do to entertain the kids, and you know, so all these kind of channels where we're trying to kind of seek connection and comfort, that can be full of triggers, like, you know, everywhere. And the other thing, of course, is just, you know, having conversations with friends can even be hard, because people do sometimes assume that because you're on your own and you don't have your family, that, you know, you must be fine and relaxed, or you don't have those additional worries. And that can be difficult for you, because maybe you want to speak up, or you don't know how to reach out, or you have to kind of, you know, you feel like you don't want to be miserable, or you don't want to, you know, you should count your blessings and stuff like that. And as I said, like, it's hard for everyone. So on the other hand, if you are childless, don't assume that your friends with kids are having the time of their life doing happy family things. You know, there's a lot of unhappy family situations out there. There's a lot of toxic situations out there. So it's really just about being mindful of each other. You know, everyone is having their issues to deal with. It's all relative. But yeah, like, as I said, I wanted to just address the kind of CNBC situation, because I just wanted to let you know, if you are CNBC, you're not alone. There are other people, and there are definitely some lovely like Facebook groups that are offering support, you know, with like-minded people in your situation. If you want to send me a message, please do. I can recommend some groups where you can have mutual support from other people in your situation, whether you're single, in a couple, or whatever there is. You know, there's this kind of misconception as well that, you know, if you're single or if you're in a couple, maybe there's different levels of like how upset you should be, and that's not true. Everyone's kind of pain and you know, grief and stress, everyone's, whether they have children or you don't, is valid. You know, it's just a matter of us all coming together at this time and just appreciating that we all have our issues and we all need some support.